instructions on how to use this disc, click on the directions sign. To turn off the audio story that will accompany you on your journey, point to the Guided Tours Only sign and click the mouse. If you do not wish to enter the maze, click on the painted sign on the ground that says Leave and exit the program.
The maze. I met them at the gate, though I usually wait inside. Preoccupied with their own thoughts, impatient like so many children, they didn't see who I really was. They never noticed my crown, my pain, the fire in my eyes. Like all others, they think the maze was made for them. Actually, it's the other way around. They think I'm some poet who will lead them through the symbols and spaces of this underworld. They think I will teach them lessons. They should call me Cerberus. I am the lesson. The monstrous walls rise up and run away as far as the human eye can see, circling and dividing. Which half is the maze? Even I get lost. It changes, sometimes slowly, imperceptibly, sometimes suddenly. This house is not only made of stone and mortar, wood and paint. It is made of time and mystery, hope and fear. Construction never stops. I take some pride in my role as architect. They think I will guide them to the center. Perhaps I will. The sun was very hot. Together we walked through the gate into the entrance hall of the maze. They looked carefully at the bronze doors, trying to choose. The uncertainty of visitors is one of my little pleasures.
Decisions, decisions, too many decisions.
The story of my life.
We don't want to be late.
It's easy to get lost. This can be a sinister place. The sun glared at me through the gateway. Something was ringing behind one of the doors. They spent some time trying to decide which door it was, not understanding that the silences of the maze are as eloquent as the sounds. They opened one of the doors and peered into the gloom.
Nary a soul to be seen.
I waited patiently for them to choose which way to go. They made their decision and went into a dramatic room with 4 entrances and exits.
Not enough light in here.
Not very tidy either.
Which way now, children? They objected to my tone, but it distracted them from the real clues. The game usually goes as I plan it, despite the intentions of my visitors, or perhaps because of their intentions.
What the devil is this supposed to be?
They gathered around, and I realized they were close to something. I quickly picked up the bell, ringing it loudly. Was this what you heard outside? Holding their ears, they ran out the door to room number 30.
What a beautiful door. The others are so plain.
It's meant to influence our decision.
Maybe this has been done so we won't choose this door.
They wanted to know what the letters meant. Obviously they meant something, and I said so.
Yes, but why O and U? What special significance can they have for us?
The more confused they became, the more I enjoyed it. No matter how many times I've been through this, I'm always fascinated. Leaving the room and all that it contained behind us, we entered the next room. In one corner, a savage animal appeared ready to leap out, roaring, rending with tusk and claw. But it was only a bit of taxidermy after all. I suggested they might wish to hang up their coats before going on.
How will we find them? We may not pass through here again.
I assured them I would help them to return. You can count on me. Still, they wouldn't leave anything behind. Opening one of the doors, we made our way to the Great Hall of Many Doors. What a foolish face! Pay no attention. The sound made them all turn suddenly. A small black cat ran out of a door to my right, sniffed at us, and, before I could move, ran out of the hall. It was fortunate that I was still standing with the rest of them, or they might have noticed. Shall we toss a coin, or have you made up your minds? They hadn't made up their minds, and they had no coins. By a process of elimination, they decided to go to a much smaller room. A person with a white staff turned to face us. His associate shrugged, not an easy thing to do in his position, and went back to what he had been doing.
Look, this is very important.
I snatched the paper from his hand and tore it to pieces.
How will he find his way without directions?
Don't worry, here blindness is no disadvantage.
I hurried my visitors out, as quickly as I could, to a room with a floor of sand. Amphorae. They were empty, of course.
This is an easier choice to make.
You may think so, but your choices are more limited than you know. One should never accept the obvious here. If you think of the maze as a machine, confusion is its product, and the machine was hard at work. Ignoring my good advice, they hurried into the room at the center of the maze. My guests thought that whoever lived here was a careless person to leave so many things around. They were wrong. There was really only one thing for them to find: the riddle of the maze. They demanded that I show it to them. Do you think it's written on the wall for all to see? It's hidden here, somewhere, perhaps throughout the room. As far as you are concerned, what the maze teaches can be learned in every room. They looked and looked. Every group is the same. I let them have a last look around. Now, we must find our way back out. Leaving the center of the maze, we found ourselves in a room with 3 other doors. Looking out the windows, I noticed my feet had crushed something on the floor. Watch your step here. I'm always ready to be helpful with the less important things.
Look at those 2 trees out there.
He was looking over my shoulder, which is not easy to do.
Must be a real wind coming up.
Now they realized that it could rain where they were going.
We should have brought the bumbershoot with us from the coat room.
Which room was that?
You remember, the one with the animal?
I suggested that we take the door on my right, and they realized they had found the door they had been seeking for so long. The entrance to a vaulted chamber lit by a single bulb. Someone had knocked a bowl off the table. I broke another on purpose. Make sure to take that with you. You can never tell when you might need it.
Take what?
Isn't it obvious? Taking a vote amongst themselves, they went on to a spacious room with a hole in the floor. A ladder led down into the shadows. Outside, leaves shook in the wind. They didn't like the look of that hole in the floor.
Too dark down there.
Who knows what's at the bottom?
They looked at me again. Probably a room of some kind. But you know what I say about appearances. It would have been a relief to get outside for a while. They wanted to know if they had been here before. How could I answer that?
I have the strangest feeling of déjà vu.
Bolder than the rest, he led us into what looked like a combination wine cellar and junk room. Someone had been working here as well.
This is more to my taste.
Dusting off some labels, he discovered that all the bottles were empty.
I hear someone hammering.
No, that's a chopping sound.
None of them heard the faint jingling that came from behind the wall. I don't hear anything. With as much commotion as possible, I hurried them out of the room, too. The great hall of many doors. What a foolish face! Pay no attention. They hadn't made up their minds, and they had no coins. By a process of elimination, they decided to go to room number 15.
At least 3 of us can sit down here.
There were only 3 possible choices. Leaning on the sacrificial tripod, I was suddenly moved to say, perhaps these numbers relate to each other in some specific combination. Immediately I regretted this act of charity. Sometimes I think, after all these years, that I don't really know myself. One of them thought he had worked it out and, very pleased with himself, led us into a long open room with no roof.
What is going on here?
Sometimes important messages are couched in ambiguous terms. That net may help you catch the answer to your question. They looked doubtful.
We must look at this from all sides before we make a decision.
At last, they were learning. They really couldn't decide which way to go. Half of them wanted to go one way, half another. They were close to splitting up when there was a rattling sound and one of the doors was shaken from the other side. They all stopped talking and moved closer together. They soon agreed on a direction, and we departed for room number 20. The ringing stopped as soon as we entered. What is the matter now?
Too many animals for a proper house.
They walked carefully around the edges of the room. I watched with an amusement shared, I think, by the wise old tortoise. With backward looks and muttered comments about turtles, they left room number 20 and entered the entrance hall of the maze. They looked carefully at the bronze doors, trying to choose. The uncertainty of visitors is one of my little pleasures.
Decisions, decisions, too many decisions.
The story of my life.
We don't want to be late.
It's easy to get lost. This can be a sinister place. The sun glared at me through the gateway. Something was ringing behind one of the doors. They made their decision and went into a room with a special piece of furniture I thought might appeal to my guests.
How can we trust that thing? Who knows where it ends up?
Naturally, I knew. But that wasn't the point. They were pretty sure of themselves, and went right on to a room that smelled of paint. Faint voices, apparently in an argument, came from behind the locked door.
You know, that sounds like us in there.
They tried the door, but naturally it wouldn't open. The voices stopped when the door rattled. One picked up the umbrella.
It may rain where we're going.
I signaled my approval. After a short rest, we came to one of the biggest rooms in the house. All 3 doorways were dark. Afraid to go out? Since they tried to think of themselves as adults, they didn't care for my question.
Not really, but that doesn't mean we have to go running around out there just to prove something to you.
I knew she would bear watching. Choose then. Pay no attention to anything I say. I knew they couldn't afford not to listen to me entirely. They were so easily led. Turning around, the group took a path that completely surprised me after all, and I followed them to a room that smelled of paint. Faint voices, apparently in an argument, came from behind the locked door.
You know, that sounds like us in there.
They tried the door, but naturally it wouldn't open. After a short rest, we came to a middle-class drawing room or parlor. It was amazing how much more comfortable they felt in these surroundings. Everyone sat down, some on the floor, and chatted about where they had been and where they should go. Magpies! Not a real thought in their heads. They were so much at ease, they almost missed what the room was telling them altogether. They finally got the message, which I thought was pretty obvious, and went on to a high room with the image of a crown on the wall for everyone to see now. Though one of my parents might be low-born, the other was close to a king. I've always felt at home here.
Which door ought we take?
I rather brusquely indicated the 3 doors. Any of these is fine for my purposes. They were disconcerted at the apparent lack of clues.
Perhaps in another room.
They murmured amongst themselves as they left for room number 13. They weren't really comfortable here, and I knew why.
No, we're not all superstitious.
Only some of you, then? They were worried it might be Friday. Well, it's true that it was closer to the end of the week than they realized. It takes a great deal of experience, certainly more than they possessed, to understand how time works in the maze. The clock thought it was 6 in the evening. Quickly moving on, we came to a darkened chamber dominated by a large figure. We could see that someone had been working here recently. The entrance I had so carefully hidden had been uncovered. I made a note to return as soon as I could and fill in the hole again. The visitors were so intrigued with the entrance at the bottom of the excavation that they ignored what the figure was trying to tell them.
Where are the workmen?
They must be ahead of us. If we hurry, we can catch them. Catch up with them. I herded the group through the door to what appeared to be an old storeroom. Dust obscured a damaged painting, making it hard to understand just what the artist had intended.
This could be a trick of some sort. We might be going around in circles.
I don't think so. I think we're supposed to think it's a trick. That's the trick.
They all looked at me. Yes, I'm sure you're right about that. With doubtful looks, they left for a much warmer room. Shadows danced across the floor to the fire's music.
Someone's lost his hat.
Are you sure it's the hat that's lost? No one would answer me. Ducking behind a curtain and hurrying down a passageway, we came out in an entirely different sort of place. The group complained of feeling all turned around, as well they might. Because no one wanted to stay here very long, they missed the real sign while looking through the obvious. People in their situation, confronted with a challenge, tend to accept the terms of the challenge as a given, without examining it from all sides. How many sides does that problem have? They don't know. We passed down a long flight of stairs, through some sort of pantry, and on into the room with no floor. They crowded each other on the narrow ledge. The bold one ventured out to the center. Realizing that they could see all of the signs only from the center of the room, several wanted to turn back. With exaggerated caution, considering their predicament, they finally reached the door they wanted, and eventually found themselves in what appeared to be someone's basement. One of them sank down gratefully on an old couch, which promptly collapsed. I tried to hide my smile.
A totem or tribal fetish?
He walked around the center of the room.
It could be a work of art.
Perhaps it's a signal to us, a warning or direction.
Not much help when there's only one way to go.
I still think it's a signal.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. She was immediately suspicious. With no real choice to make, we left the thing standing alone in light and silence, and went into the room with no floor. They crowded each other on the narrow ledge. With exaggerated caution, considering their predicament, they finally reached the door they wanted, and eventually found themselves in a pleasant room with 3 doors and a lamp. Looking at the picture on the wall, they decided it wasn't a very good likeness. One of them almost fell over something on the floor. He sounded like an old man. Weren't you ever irresponsible? I thought of my childhood and how wild I had been. We noticed the nearby music and stopped to listen for a moment. Leaving the pictures looking out at an empty room, we went on to a stone chamber, which reminded me of my old neighbors. Of course, that was a long time ago now, but would you believe their descendants are still telling stories about me and my family to their children? Even if most of the stories are lies and exaggerations, it is immortality of a sort. As I passed in front of an open doorway, a figure, crossing the hall outside, saw me and immediately ran off.
Who was that?
Another visitor, to be sure.
Why did he run away?
You probably scared him. They apparently believed me. With few regrets on my part, we left for an old ruinous part of the house. Turning a corner, the music we had been hearing became louder, and at last we saw the musicians themselves. They were so involved they failed to hear us. The music was suited to the scene, a moody, romantic melody. We stopped to listen. I admit that I, too, was affected by the sound as well as by the spectacle of the masked players. One of the visitors noticed me listening.
Beautiful music, don't you think?
It's not bad. The viol brings the right sense of warmth to the piece, but the guitarist is overplaying his part. Still, he adds a certain plangent brio to an otherwise introspective composition. Unwilling to interrupt the concert, we slipped past the musicians into the door to a pleasant room with 3 doors and a lamp. Leaving the pictures looking out at an empty room, we went on to the room with no floor. They crowded with exaggerated caution, considering their predicament. They finally reached the door they wanted, and eventually found themselves in an entirely different sort of place. The group complained of feeling. We passed down a long flight of stairs, through some sort of pantry, and on into a much warmer room. Ducking behind a curtain and hurrying down a passageway, we came out in room number 13. They weren't really quickly moving on, we came to a high room with the image of a crown on the wall forever. They murmured amongst themselves as they left for a middle-class drawing room or parlor. It was amazing how much more they were so much at ease. They almost missed what the room was telling them altogether. They finally got the message, which I thought was pretty obvious, and went on to a room that smelled of paint. Faint voices, apparently. After a short rest, we came to a room with a special piece of furniture I thought might appeal to my... They were pretty sure of themselves, and went right on to the entrance hall of the maze. They looked carefully at the bronze doors, trying to choose. The uncertainty of visitors is one of my little... They made their decision and went into a yard containing shrubs trimmed in ornamental shapes. This is called...
We know what the name is. Why don't you just tell us which way to go?
I wasn't referring to the plants. I refused to say anything else, leaving them to find their own way to a courtyard of palms and statues. The trees waved to each other in the breeze.
Who left the door open?
We came in that way. But they were convinced we had entered by another door entirely. They vanished through the wall, and I followed them to a yard containing shrubs trimmed in ornamental shapes. I refused to say anything else, leaving them to find their own way to a melancholy little courtyard surrounded by a brick wall too high to see over. A dead tree lifted its bone-white branches to a sky filling with gray clouds.
Those doors look very strange.
You should say they look very strangely.
They seem to be watching us.
A sudden gust of wind made the branches clatter against each other like old boards. Dead leaves began to gather at our feet. Shivering in the wind, we managed to push open one of the heavy doors and make our way to a shaded portico. A late afternoon sun warmed the rough blocks of stone.
Get out of the way!
We moved into the yard, squinting at the strong light. One of them sat on a marble bench after I politely pushed some flowers aside.
Did you pick these for me?
She was looking me in the eye. I had to tell her the truth. In another part of the grounds, someone was singing, but they couldn't make out the words. Like children, they soon became restless and impatient to see something new. So we went on to an airy room with many doors. It was a big space, but I still felt crowded. I've always hated confinement. Whatever you do, don't touch that.
This must be an important room. It has more doors than any of the others.
This was not true, but I didn't want to interrupt.
With so many paths crossing here, we must be close to the center.
I had noticed this guest before. I'd have to be careful. This is an important choice. I was trying to encourage them. Gratefully leaving the room behind, we walked all the way to the foundation of the maze. Deep underground stones had been carved and fitted. Passages opened in the natural rock.
These symbols are quite unusual. They seem to be primitive signs.
Do you know what signs?
Oh, you know, wind and water, hills and planets.
It was surprising that he could identify any of the symbols, but I was relieved that he couldn't read them correctly. Choosing more or less at random, they went through a passageway to a narrow space where one wall boasted half-finished carvings and another some sort of carnival poster. There was a little confusion as we made our entrance, but we soon sorted ourselves out. It was impossible to climb up the slippery slide, and another door wouldn't open for us. So after emptying the pebbles from our shoes, we marched on to a gaudy room. Places like this are overdone, for my taste. But some people like the exotic. Well, everyone is a critic. It's true, I am by nature extremely critical. Although my life is a lonely one, I've not spared any of my guests the rigor of my judgment. We all have our roles to play. This is not a bad place, really. One could spend quite some time here. However, in their restive way, the group moved on to a great hall, dominated by the entrance to room 22. The face over the door had a sly look.
Is it good or bad to have only two choices?
It was, predictably enough, neither good nor bad. These people just didn't know how to phrase a meaningful question. You have to be very particular in this house. We went on to a narrow space where one wall boasted half-finished carving. It was impossible to climb up the slippery slide, and another door wouldn't open for us. So after emptying the pebbles from our shoes, we marched on to the foundation of the maze. Choosing more or less at random, they went through a passageway to a gloomy, cave-like place far underground. Even I was oppressed by the weight that hung over our heads. A very small hole, high above, admitted a feeble light. Standing in the light, One of them put his hand out.
I think it may be raining out there.
They didn't like the look of the place. You continue to judge everything by the way it looks. I was exasperated by their timidity. I knew I shouldn't have said anything. If you think of all the deceptions practiced in my family, particularly on my father... We went down, the only way open to us, and came to the foundation of the maze. Choosing more or less at random, they went through a passageway to an airy room with many doors. Gratefully leaving the room behind, we walked all the way to a place of unlimited darkness.
Where are the doors? I can't see any doors.
Dozens of eyes blinked at us in the Stygian gloom.
Be careful where you step. This spot is taken.
By the time my uncertain visitors turned to ask me what to do, I was already far away.
Oh, there are no doors. You're here with the rest of us now.
Even my bellowing laughter couldn't fill this space. They made their decision. Room number 20. The ringing stopped with backward looks and muttered comments about turtles. They left room number 20 and entered the tree room.
Are these real?
I told him the trees were as real as anything else in the house. As this was an important decision, I encouraged them to take their time. After all, the more they think about the possibilities, the more choices they have to make. What were their chances of choosing wisely? 1 in 4? 2 in 4, perhaps, if I was generous about it. And why not be generous? There are 190 doors in this part of the house, counting the gate. Enough for everyone. Making a choice, they entered a very long, dark corridor, and at last came out into room number 30.
What a beautiful...
Leaving the room, and all that it contained behind us, we entered the next room. In one corner, the great hall of many doors. What a foolish face! They hadn't made up their minds, and they had no coins. By a process of elimination, they decided to go to a much smaller room. A person with a... I hurried my visitors out as quickly as I could to a bright room whose walls were in some disrepair. They studied the old frescoes for clues, but missed the obvious signs.
Are we on the right path?
Keeping in mind what a relative term right is, I assured them they were indeed on the right path. As for the correct path, or the most appropriate path, well, that might be something else. Full of confidence now, they marched out to a much smaller room. I hurried my visitors out as quickly as I could to a room with a floor of sand. Ignoring my good advice, they hurried into the room at the center of the maze. My guests thought that whoever... Leaving the center of the maze, we found ourselves in a spacious room with a hole in the floor. A ladder led down into the shadows. Outside, leaves shook in the wind. They didn't like the look of that hole in the floor.
Too dark down there.
Who knows what's at the bottom?
They looked at me again. Probably a room of some kind. But you know what I say about appearances. It would have been a relief to get outside for a while. They wanted to know if they had been here before. How could I answer that?
I have the strangest feeling of déjà vu.
Bolder than the rest, he led us into a large square room with a hole rudely broken through one wall. It must have taken a great deal of strength to pull the heavy stones out of position. The symmetry was also disturbed by the apparent loss of one of the room's statues. My visitors thought a thief had broken into the room, removed the figure, and made away with it. This, of course, was one explanation.
Another one?
You mean another representative of the animal kingdom?
What is a bird like that doing here?
Roosting, evidently. Their attitude was really beginning to irritate me. I've come to think of all the inhabitants of this house as members of my little kingdom. People can be so arrogant. In a very real way, we are all of us animals, at least in part. I wouldn't answer any more of their questions, so we left an airy room with many doors, gratefully leaving the room a place of unlimited darkness.
Where are the doors? I can't see any doors.
Dozens of eyes blinked at us in the Stygian gloom.
Be careful where you step. This spot is taken.
By the time my uncertain visitors turned to ask me what to do, I was already far away.
Oh, there are no doors. You're here with the rest of us now.
Even my bellowing laughter couldn't fill this space.